Hi there and welcome back to my channel. This is Sean, the Honest Book Reviewer. This video is all about my August reads, all the books I read for the month of August. Now it's not from the first book to the last book of the month. It's in different sections in this video, different categories. Let's get started now. The first is classic reads. So each month of the year, I have a random picking program picked from a list of about 50 classic books. Now the list was 50 at the start of the year, so as the year progresses, the list gets smaller and smaller, but this program picks 2 books per month. 2 books I can choose from to read one of those books during the month. During the month of August, I read The Mysteries of Udolpho, written by Anne Radcliffe. What did I think? So this book is a gothic romance, and it's meant to have inspired that whole subgenre. Yes, this book is gothic in small sections, well, one section in particular, it's gothic there. For most of the book, it's not gothic really at all. It is romantic, so the romance story is the biggest part of this story. It's the big element, the draw card for readers, I think, is that romance element. If you like that, read this book. So in this book, the romance is very melodramatic. We have people sighing all the time. It's constant. So many characters just sigh and weep and wail all the time. They faint as well. We have so many people fainting in this story, fainting onto sofas, onto chairs, sometimes onto the ground, whatever. We have people fainting all the time in this story. So much going on in this book is so melodramatic and just over emotional. But I guess it was the style of writing at the time. And dialogue. I mean, in this book, it takes paragraphs of dialogue to say something, and it really does. And in modern fiction, I guess, you condense that into shorter chunks of dialogue. But in the day this was written, it's just very, very long, those chunks of dialogue. So if you enjoy romance of that nature, melodramatic, high-strung, people fainting and sighing and weeping, then you might enjoy this story. I didn't really enjoy those elements at all. I just found it over the top. The gothic elements in the castle. So in one section in this book, our protagonist Emily is taken to a castle because her aunt marries this guy who owns this castle. And they go there, it's isolated, and they're cut off from everything and everybody. And in those sections, it is gothic. We have gothic elements playing out. It's quite, thrilling, suspenseful, different things playing out in that story. But it's only one small section in this entire book. And this book is very long. This book is too long for what it is really. Far too long. It is a struggle to get through. I found it a struggle anyway. I read the entire thing. I didn't really enjoy it that much, but I do get the point of the story. And I guess you have to pay homage to the fact that this book inspired that whole gothic romantic subgenre. But despite all that, not very enjoyable for me at all. So during September, I have to read a classic book, and my program will give me 2 books to choose from. Let's find out what the first book is now. The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. Now, I've wanted to read this book for a long time. I may find myself reading that in September. Okay, book 2. Emma, another great choice. 2 great books to choose from, I think. I don't know which way I'll go. I'm just not sure. I'll have to find out during the month. So let's go to the random country read now. So each month I have a program that picks a country for me. Now I have to read a book by an author who was born in that country during the month. The list was about 50 countries or so. The list is shrinking, of course, as each month goes by. But in August, the country was Haiti. I had to read a book from an author born in Haiti. What did I choose? Let's find out. I read Everything Inside, written by Edwidge Danticat. It's a collection of short stories. Now, this collection of stories seems to center around just segments of life, like scenes of life, sometimes one scene in a life. And it's all about connection, I think, in this book. It doesn't have to be connection to do with families. It can be connection with strangers, a one-off connection with somebody. It can be just about connection in this book. And also it's about memories, like shared memories, about grief, loss, love, even joy in this story as well. And the joy moments in this book is more centered around memories. And I enjoyed kind of those components of these stories, for many of them anyway. I didn't really enjoy all the stories. I had my favorites, but overall I just thought it was cohesive as a collection. Those themes and things going through it were cohesive, all about connection with people, with memory, just with life in a way. And the sections of life taken in these stories is all quite different. We had different things going on and different moments of challenges, I think, for different characters in these short stories as well. Some characters found themselves in situations that were confronting. Some of them found themselves in situations that were final, quite deadly. There were life and death things going on in some of these stories as well. So I found there was a whole range of just human emotion, human connection, human activity, and just human scenarios, I guess, in these short stories. But they were all linked heavily about connection between people, connection with memory, and connection with different moments in life, some fleeting, some permanent, some ongoing, but all those things played out through all these stories. My favourite story in this collection, I have to say there were 8 stories in this collection. My favourite story was a story called Sunrise Sunset. I liked that a lot. Check this collection out if it sounds like something you'd like to read. Go read a blurb by it. I will do a more in-depth video on this, of course, but I think this collection for me, and I don't find myself being a huge fan of short story collections, never have been, but I didn't mind this one actually. Overall, on average, it was above average overall. So for me, that's a good sign. For me to have a short story collection that's above average means there's something in there for people to enjoy. Okay, that was the country for August. What about September? What country from the list will be chosen? Let's find out. The country is Morocco. I have to find a book by an author who was born in Morocco. I'm sure I will. I don't know what it will be. I'll find out during the month anyway. Now for the monthly prompt read. So at the start of the year, I had a video where I chose 12 monthly prompts, one prompt for each month of the year. And from those prompts, there are 2 books. One I have to read, and one I'll read if I have time. What was the prompt for August? Choose a book written by a female author or featuring strong, complex women at its centre. The must-read was When the Crawdads Sing. If I had time, The Handmaid's Tale. I definitely read When the Crawdads Sing. Now I thought this book was quite well written, and it was mostly well written in 2 aspects: characters and imagery. There's scenery in this story, especially around the marshlands. So this book takes place primarily around an area where there's lots of marshes, and through the character's eyes, protagonist's eyes in this story. Those scenes, those pictures, almost like paintings really, they're described so well. And in fact, if that was described poorly in the story, I think it would affect the character, our protagonist. Because it's through protagonist interactions and links with the marshes that we understand her more deeply. And I think if we didn't understand the settings in that detail, then the protagonist would make less sense. The protagonist wouldn't be as deep or as complete in the story. So those 2 things, descriptions, imagery, and the characters, are so intertwined in this story, and it was so well done in both aspects. There is a mystery in this book, and the mystery is done well, but I think overall the mystery does pale in comparison to the characters and the settings. There's also a coming-of-age story for our protagonist, Kaya. When we first meet Kaya, I think she may be 7 or maybe even 6 years old, and we're with her in this story for a few decades, and we see her growth. There are some parts of the story that are a bit implausible, I think, but I think framing this from the 1950s to somewhere in the 1970s, maybe even early 1980s, I think that was a good choice because it made those things more believable. So even though they're implausible, I think in the story, they're more believable because of that time period. But I do like her growth, I like her story, I like her coming of age story. It makes sense in the story, and through it all she's so consistent. And she does feel real, so despite all the things happening to her not feeling like they're reality, her character feels real. Other characters in the book are also well drawn. I like many characters in this story. The mystery, the things surrounding the mystery, what happens with the mystery, for me just wasn't that strong. There are certain elements of that which just felt a bit weak in the story. So overall, I enjoyed this more for the characters and the scenery. I think this author has a great grasp of setting and scenery. I don't think all authors do. Some authors do try and they do fail, but this author just made it so immersive. I felt like I was in those scenes. I felt like I experienced it with our protagonist. So a great story, I think, to enjoy and embrace. If you haven't read this book yet, do read it. I recommend it. Read it for the characters and the settings. So that was August. What about September? What's our prompt? With spring in the air, read a book about growth, renewal, or rebirth. Whether it's nature-themed, a character's personal growth, or a fresh start. The must-read is The Secret Garden. If I Have Time, Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine. And remember, it's based on Australian seasons, Southern Hemisphere, not Northern Hemisphere, hence why I've got September being a spring theme. Now it's Random Bookshelf Reads. So each month I have a program that picks randomly 6 books for me to read from my bookshelves. And this list at the start of the year was about 170, 180 books. So of course, it's getting smaller and smaller as time moves on during the year. But this program picks 6 books for me to read each month. I have to say that I didn't read all 6 during August. I missed out on 1. I read 5 of them. Let's find out what they were and what I thought. First book is Trust Me by Jeff Abbott. Now, this book had a great premise, had a great start. I was hooked from the start immediately. And in its premise, we have our protagonist. And the protagonist is an ordinary person. And this person in the book is thrust into a situation that's extraordinary. And I do like books like that. I like books where we get ordinary people. They're not in law enforcement. They're not superheroes. They're not PIs. They're ordinary people living ordinary jobs or whatever. Then they're thrust into the situation that's dangerous, that's out of their depth. I like that in thrillers, in mysteries, any genre basically. I like that concept. This book had that. It hooked me from the word go. But then it changes. About 100 pages or so in, it does change. It becomes just a book that feels a bit muddled. I mean, those moments that are thrilling at the start, there's less of them later on in the story. It forgets what it is basically in this book, and it tries to remember that later on in the story, but I think by then it's too late, and it tries to become something different again later on in the story. And the great strength of the start of the story was just the pace. The pace was quick, it wasn't overwordy, it was just about pace and movement and that character and those characters' reactions in the story as well. When it changed, the pace slowed. That's due to the wordiness. It became overwordy. So the flow just slowed down. So moments that are meant to be high tension, high octane, or really tense just didn't work that well because it was overwordy. And I just think when it happens, it's such a letdown because the premise is good, the concept is good, there are elements I love in this story, and just having it change so dramatically in the book, a letdown. But overall, not a terrible story at all. I'd read more by the same author. And this book had an open ending, so it suggested maybe a sequel. I would read a sequel to this story, but I think even now, there's not a sequel written. I hope one day there is. People Might Hear You, written by Robin Klein. It's an Australian book, Australian author. It's a YA book. And I like this book a lot. Now this author wrote another book called Hating Alison Ashley. I loved that book when I was young. I'd read it again. And this book, I think, is so well done. It is a bit dated, but being dated, it makes it even more sinister and chilling. So basically, it's about a girl. She finds herself in the clutches of this cult-like religion. And she finds herself kind of trapped in this house. And it's all about her experiences in that house with this group. And the way it's written in a way where things don't happen suddenly. It's very quiet and things move slowly. And that slow movement and that slow awareness and that slow kind of confining feeling in the story and makes it more sinister and more chilling, has more impact in the way it's written in that way. And I do enjoy that in this book. I thought very well written. Our young protagonist is written very well. And I just thought that feeling of being trapped, that feeling of being watched, that feeling of being confined in this house, of not being able to move freely, not being able to think for yourself or dress for yourself, being told what to do all the time. All those things you hear about happening in cults, that's in this story. And for a YA book, I think it was very well done. It is quite dark in tone and feel, I think, but not too dark. but I enjoyed this very much. Goodbye California by Alistair MacLean. Now, I thought I'd enjoy this. I've read a few books by this author during the year. Some I've enjoyed a lot, occasionally not so much, and this book is one of those books where it didn't work for me very much at all. It has a great premise, and that premise I thought was so interesting and compelling and engaging, but the book itself just falls apart. It starts off very well. We have a great start to the book, a great hook. We have missing uranium, so that feels dangerous, it feels deadly. And then we have a great villain. At the start, it was a great villain, but quickly it becomes almost like a parody, and it felt like both sides in this book were just being lazy and being unusual. I mean, we had characters on both sides just sitting around drinking wine, watching TV, drinking beer, having chats, no action, nothing at all. Then suddenly towards the end, it tries to ramp up and have a bit of action, but then it just falls down in a heap straight away, and it concludes just strangely and too quickly and too neatly, and it just feels like this book feels like it wasn't written by Alistair MacLean. It feels like it was somebody else, and he put his name on it for some reason, but it just feels like a miss. It feels like something happened in the writing of this book and everybody just went home and did nothing with it. I mean, it just feels terrible in the way it's presented, the way it's executed. So for me, a big letdown from a great premise by an author who can write great books. I mean, this author has written great books, and some books I've read by the author this year have been wonderful. But this book, a huge letdown. Number to Count, written by Christopher Reich, is a finance thriller. And I have to say, after reading this book, I have a new appreciation for finance thrillers. I want to read more of them. I'd read more by this author. But this book isn't perfect, but overall, it's above average. Now, this book had a great start. So another book that has a great start, and the first section, maybe first 2/3, are really good. And then it falls down, and it falls down because it becomes too long. I think this fell into a trap. So I think it was published in the 1990s, and I think it falls into the trap from that decade where some people, some authors, some publishers just thought more pages meant a better story. The longer the book, more pages, people will read it and enjoy it more. Doesn't always work. The last section just slows down, becomes overwordy, just too slow. Things are bogged down too much in the story. Then suddenly towards the end, it switches, becomes almost like an action thriller. So we have changes right through this book in tone and feel. And it starts off being a great slow burn book. I mean, it was very compelling with some great characters, a great concept, and that slow burn feel had great tension and great atmosphere. It worked really well. Then it bogs down and becomes a flatline story, then ramps up into action hero mode. I mean, I don't really get all those changes. It just felt like 3 different stories in one. Didn't work for it, but overall, because of those slow burn moments, that great section at the start, I think overall the story does work. And it does make sense for the whole book. So despite it having these changes and moments that I felt let down with the story, overall the structure is fine, the story is fine, the characters are done very well, even in moments where there was flatlined and just too bogged down in nothing. The characters are still well done and still well drawn and created. The author, I think, should have just shrunk down the pages, remove parts, take away that action hero thing going towards the end, and keep that slow burn tension going right through the story, because it worked so well. And for me, it suggests this author knows how to write, and I want to read more by the same author. Universal Harvester, written by John Darnielle. It's a horror, and a book that has a great premise, a great concept. I mean, it's so creepy. We have this guy who's working part-time in a video store. So back in the day, we had VHS tapes, and people borrowed them, just like DVDs. People borrowed these VHS tapes, they had movies, whatever, took them home and watched them. They don't exist now, of course, unless you're very retro and you still have a VHS player and tapes for some reason, but they were the big thing back in the day. So anyway, and I have to mention that with these tapes, they can become tangled. I mean, you'd watch things on a tape. You'd borrow a VHS movie or TV show from a store or buy one or whatever, and you'd watch it, and then it would jam in the machine. So you have to take it out, get it out somehow, and then the video store would splice it. They just remove that section that was maybe damaged and just splice it together. And that's kind of what happens in this story in a roundabout way. So this guy is working at this store, and he takes movies home to watch with his father. He's watching one movie at one stage by himself. His father went to bed. He's watching a movie, and suddenly there's a scene spliced into the movie. And it's a scene shot in black and white, I think, from memory. And it's almost like he's watching someone being attacked or someone being murdered. And it just cuts out after a minute or so. And then it happens in a few more different movies from the same store. So we have somebody splicing in scenes, quite sinister scenes, into movies, VHS tapes at this store. But that's very creepy because it just makes you wonder who's doing it, why they're doing it, where is this happening, is it local? I mean, so many questions about these tapes, and I was hooked by that premise and that concept, and very early on in this story it was so gripping and so engaging. Then it just shifts, becomes something else, something totally different. It forgets everything about the horror. It's more about just people, more about these people trying to almost work out their lives, their future. And the focus on the tapes just kind of, it becomes forgotten in the story in a way. And this whole creepy concept becomes less creepy as time moves on, becomes forgotten. And when it tries to ramp up and suggest horror scenes, horror moments later on in the story, it moves into something else. So you wonder, okay, this scene would be a great horror moment in a story. And then the author lets you down because it's something else altogether. For a horror story, it had a great concept and then forgot it was a horror story. That's my point of view anyway. And overall, I found this a letdown because it has a great start. I mean, a huge start in this book that's so creepy, so chilling, so engaging, and then the book forgets what it is for the rest of the story. So okay, let's find out the 6 bookshelf reads for September. Let's start with book 1. The War of the Flowers. Is this a play on the War of the Roses? I'm not sure. I'll definitely find out in September. Okay, book 2. Honor the Dead. Well, it could be a war book, could be a thriller, an action book. Sounds like it may be one of those things. I'll find out anyway. Okay, book 3. What Alice Forgot. I'm not sure about that. Is it like a mystery, a thriller, a family drama? I'll find out soon anyway. Okay, book 4. The Last Anniversary. I've got a feeling this is Liane Moriarty. I do hope so because I do enjoy her books. Okay, book 5. The Memory Man. Now, I don't know anything about this book. It could be anything. But it sounds like some sort of sci-fi thriller, something like that. Find out anyway in September. Okay, book 6 of Random Bookshelf Reads for the month. Ask for Me Tomorrow. I have no idea what it's going to be. I don't think I'll find out by tomorrow. Who knows? But I just have no idea what it is. I'll find out anyway during the month. Now I'll move on to ARC reads for the month of August. And during August, I read 4 books that were ARC reads. Let's go to them now. The first was Witch, written by Simon R. Green. It's a horror mystery, and it's the 3rd book in a series, and the series is called The Holy Terrors. And I think maybe it may be the last book in the series. I hope not, because I'm enjoying these books very much. They're mysteries, they're horror. There's also humour there. In a way, it's very light in tone and feel. but they have great characters. We have two protagonists who are so well written, great characters, but other characters that are there just for the books, one-off characters. They're written so well. For short books, they're shortish books, not novellas, just shortish books. The characters are so well written, you understand them perfectly. You understand their desires, you understand their motivations. You get inside those characters quite easily. This author has a great knack for presenting characters in short books. This mystery, this horror story, takes place in an old theatre, and the theatre group in this book is they're trying to rehearse a show. And then sinister things keep happening. They think they're cursed. They think maybe a ghost in the building. So our two protagonists are investigating. And what happens, it can be quite bloody. There are scenes in here that feel like horror scenes. It can be quite dangerous feeling, quite sinister, but also it can be a bit comical as well in the story. And this author is one of those authors who can blend humour and dark moments, horror moments, and do it quite well. And I don't think many authors can do that. Many authors may try. I don't think many authors succeed. So this book moves well, a fast pace, a good mystery, but overall out of the 3 books, the mystery just resolved too cleanly, too effortlessly. It felt too easy in the story for a protagonist to resolve this story. I just think overall that let it down a little bit. But I love the characters, I love the setting, I do enjoy the horror moments, I enjoy many things in this book. Five Found Dead, written by Solari Gentle. It's a mystery, almost like a classic mystery. It's set on the Orient Express, so we have an isolated setting, which I do enjoy. We have confined spaces. It's almost like a closed circle mystery as well, because on the train you have a set number of characters, so I enjoy that in mysteries as well. This book also pays homage to Agatha Christie in different ways, but this book is let down in a way because it becomes too cluttered. There are too many characters in this story, too many elements, and I think we just had character after character after character being introduced in certain ways, and all those characters are trying to, almost in a way, solve this mystery as well, trying to insert themselves into the mystery and solve it. It was almost like a book where the author's throwing everything in and the kitchen sink, and it just felt really strange to me and too cluttered. We have retired detectives, current detectives, private investigators, aristocrats, inquisitive old ladies, a terrorism expert, COVID lockdowns, and much more. And all those elements, all those different characters thrown into a story, into a confined space. It was too cluttered for the story and the setting. It just felt too much. There was too many characters just pulling left and right, and as a reader, your attention is just going everywhere. I mean, it was too weird, I think, in a story like this. And I do understand it in a way, because this author is kind of saying, well, I have all these characters that are representing key characters from Agatha Christie's stories, or different ideas from her stories. So I get it. I get why we've got all these things going on, but it's too cluttered, it becomes too much of a mess. But what I did like is the pace. The pace is quite fast moving, which I did think suited the setting. The setting being this train that's moving. So I like that. It's connected. I didn't mind the voice. The narrative voice is quite good. That protagonist is quite good as well. So there are some characters in this book that are good, despite there being many characters that became a bit annoying in the story. So there are many things to like in this book. The mystery is okay, not the strongest, but I just think overall it is enjoyable. I don't hate the story. I think many readers will enjoy it more than I do for different reasons. But for me, it was too cluttered, and just so many things pulling your attention left and right just made me not like this story as much as I thought I would. How to Talk to Your Dog About Murder, written by Emily Soderbergh, a cozy mystery. Now, despite the title, nobody in this book is talking to a dog about murder. I found that a letdown because the title intrigued me. I wondered, who's talking to their dog about murder? And I wanted that in the story, but it doesn't have that in this story. What we do have is a protagonist who works with animals, an animal behavioralist. So I think that's the connection, because the main thing she does is work with dogs, it seems. So for me, that connects to the title, but she's not talking to dogs about murder, so a letdown. But this book for me is one of those books where it's 50-50. So the writing style is fine and flows well, but it is too descriptive in places for a cozy mystery. Doesn't suit a cozy mystery in those places, but it lets the author give us characters and settings that are well described, well detailed, and drawn very well in the story. So we have a writing style that can be bogged down, the flow can be interrupted, but it allows for good things in the story. So 50-50 on that front. And then the protagonist just has too many jobs going in this story. I think she has 4 or 5 different jobs going at the same time. So too many things pulling her in different directions, and it pulls your attention as a reader in those directions as well. But then again, it allows the protagonist to talk to different people about the mystery, about the murder, and she gets help from different people in different ways. So again, 50-50. This book has a lot of things like that. It's 50-50 for a lot of elements in the story. Overall, I enjoyed it. It's a fun read. It's a fairly quick read. And a good pace despite some of those moments where it's too descriptive. It is a good pace to the story. The mystery is quite good. Not an overly strong mystery, but it is entertaining and it is mysterious. I mean, you wonder what's going on. We have some interesting characters in the book as well. So a lot going on for this book. But despite all that, I have to say again, I wanted a character to talk to a dog about murder. I mean, it is called How to Talk to Your Dog About Murder. I wanted somebody to sit down and talk to a dog about murder in this book. How Bad Things Can Get, written by Darcy Coates. It's a horror, and it leans into splatterpunk, that subgenre. If you're not sure what that is, it's a subgenre of horror that can be quite violent, quite graphic in gory detail, and very much in times for shock value, but it can be quite bloody, quite gory, and many people do enjoy that subgenre. I don't mind splatterpunk, but I do like it best when it has a good story to hold it all together. You just can't have scene after scene after scene of just gore and violence, blood and guts. You need a good story there, good characters, a good setting. When that happens, those horror moments can be almost perfect. In many cases, they are. But anyway, this book. This has an isolated setting, so we have influencers being invited to take part in a contest on an island. This contest is also run by an influencer of sorts. What nobody realizes is the island also has ties to a cult from history, and people thought the cult was disbanded many years ago, but obviously it's not. We have people still believing in the practices and beliefs of this cult. That leads into a dangerous and deadly confrontation and occurrence on this island. That's all I'll say about it in this video. It is quite bloody, it is quite gory, it's very fast paced in moments, and just very gripping, engaging and suspenseful. Some interesting characters, but this book I think is less about characters and more about those moments. Those big moments, sometimes shocking moments that are there to kind of drive the horror right through the story. But reading this, I've got to say, I wasn't sure about the overall size of the island. Sometimes it felt smaller, sometimes larger. I just wondered about that. I mean, did the author kind of have a map there, a plan there, and plan out all the spaces in the book? I'm not sure. But anyway, overall, enjoyable, fun. Is a bit splatterpunk. There's violence, there's gore. It's quite graphic in moments. But that drives this book very well, and the whole book overall is held together by a decent story. Now for other reads, just books that don't fit the categories already mentioned in this video, just other books read during the month. The first is The Last One at the Wedding, written by Jason Rekulak. Now, I thought this would be an amazing read because this author also wrote the book Hidden Pictures, which I adored. This book is good, but not as strong as the previous book I read from this author. But this book has some pluses, but also has things going on which just aren't very well done. So for instance, our protagonist is quite weak as a protagonist, as a main character in a story. He doesn't really carry the emotional weight. It feels a bit one-dimensional in a way. And that one dimension makes him feel just self-righteous and just negative and argumentative and just all these negative things going on in the story surrounding this character. It made me just feel a bit annoyed by the character actually in the story. The concept of this book is this guy, I think his name's Frank, he's a father, hasn't heard from his daughter for maybe 2-3 years. She calls out of the blue and says, "I'm getting married, you're invited to the wedding." So heads off to the wedding and she's getting married to a super rich guy, and the location of the wedding is quite secluded, and you got security, all that type of thing. So this guy brings along his sister to the wedding, and his sister looks after foster children. There's a foster child with her at the time, and so this foster child goes along with them as well. This foster child ends up being the best character in the story, her and her head lice. Her head lice is described all the time in this book, constantly. So this character, this child character, who ends up being almost like a child genius, is the best character in the book. And that may say something, because usually children characters who are written to be child geniuses I don't like in books. But it was written in a way where it suited the character because it was what the character was. It wasn't just a normal everyday person written to be well above their years in the way they speak and the things they do. This character was written to be a genius of sorts in the story. The thing about this book is it feels like a book of two halves as well. So the slow burn element worked well for the first half of the book, not for the last half. And in the last half of the book, we have a few things going on that are just ridiculous. The way the author's trying to tie up the plot just feels just awful, really, in some moments in the story. So it's almost a book of two halves, where the first half is a lot better and way better than the second half. Despite the second half having reveals, those reveals just feel way over the top and too ridiculous to be believable. But like I said, the main character as well, just his reactions to the environment as well, just felt a bit strange. Didn't feel like this character being thrust into something where he was out of his depth. He just was there to be argumentative and self-righteous and just thinking himself as being better than everybody else. And it felt strange for that character to be like that in this book. But anyway, overall, it wasn't terrible. So it had an okay structure. And despite me having, things in there that are negative for me in the story, and the main character protagonist being one of them in many cases in this book, overall, it's not a terrible story. Blue Sisters, written by Coco Malors. General fiction. It's one of those books that's about sisterhood and grief. And it's all about emotions. One of those books that's meant to have these characters coming together, all about emotional gut punches, about growth and development, all that sort of thing. But these characters, these three sisters in the story, they don't carry much emotional weight. Not right through the story. Not much of it at all. And with these three characters, they're developed in a way that's quite strange. So each of them has a talent that's taking them to almost the top of their game at certain times in their life. And it felt strange because it's like this author's creating these three characters that have metaphorical superpowers. And it's almost like, well, can't you create some character who's a bit average, a bit normal? And unfortunately, the character that's more grounded, the character that does carry emotional weight, is the sister who's dead at the start of this book. The dead character is a well-formed character in the story. How can that be? You've got characters that are moving through a narrative. They're growing, developing, they're changing, they're talking to each other. These characters are live characters. They flow and they change. They move from scene to scene. There's dialogue, all the things characters have. But the dead character is the character that feels the most complete, the most real. Very strange in a book like that. And when there is some growth and development for the characters, the sisters who are alive, it's like growth that's linked to making them go from one great talent into the next great talent, the next big thing in their lives. How odd is that, to have characters that just shift and move from one amazing thing to the next amazing thing? Does that feel normal, well-balanced, grounded? Does it carry emotional weight? I don't think so. So for me, this book was a letdown for that. On the other side, it is well written, it flows well. The writing style is fine. There are things in the book that are fine, that do work. But those three characters, especially for a book that's about sisterhood and grief, where the characters are meant to drive the story, drive the narrative, and embrace the reader and make the reader just embrace and engage with the story, those characters do fail on all those aspects. The Lost Story, written by Meg Schaefer. So it's a fantasy, adult fantasy, and it's less epic fantasy and more romance for me in this book. I do get the link to C.S. Lewis. This book is meant to be influenced by C.S. Lewis. It's quite obvious in one way. When characters find a magic door into another kingdom, another realm, but through a tree, through a hollow in a tree. C.S. Lewis was the wardrobe, in this book it's the tree. But overall, it's more a romance story than anything else. We do have fantasy elements, of course. The characters go to another realm, another world, and things happen in that realm and world. There are, different moments with different creatures and characters, all that sort of thing. But overall, it's a romance story with a fantasy skin, wearing a fantasy skin. So that was strange to me. In some ways, it almost feels YA in the way it's written. And I did wonder about that. I wondered if the author should have taken this story and made it more YA. It may have made more sense in the way it's written. But it's not terrible. Not a terrible story. It was engaging. Has a decent structure. The fantasy elements are okay, but the romance is the biggest draw card in this story. So if you like romance, it's not romantasy per se, so it's not that kind of fantasy book, but it is fantasy with a heavy romance angle. Juice, written by Tim Winton. So it's sci-fi, dystopian. Tim Winton is an Australian author. He's written many books, won awards, and you'd think this book would be great. But it's not. It's set on Earth, a near future Earth, and basically it's more a book about people destroying the environment. It's like a warning about the environment. And this world, the future Earth, is set when the environment is being destroyed. It's already been destroyed. Water is very scarce. There's climate change, all that sort of thing, high temperatures. And in Australia, in many parts of Australia, we already have, high temperatures and drought, all that sort of stuff. So you can imagine in a few years' time, in a few decades, these kind of things happening. So the book's about that. In a way, part of it almost feels like a Mad Max type of world, but I won't, dig too deeply on that angle because I don't want to draw comparisons between this book and Mad Max. But anyway, in this world, we have, all those things I mentioned. High temperatures, drought, lack of water. And it feels quite dangerous. It's dystopian, so with dystopian books, it's dangerous in a way as well because things are harsh. It's hard to live in dystopian worlds. But despite all those things going on in the book, despite, that sense of danger, not much happens with that. Things don't feel that suspenseful. Things don't feel that tense. Things don't feel super challenging. So it's weird in that way. And also the structure of this book was repetitive and weird. The whole concept of a character being captured by another character and being forced to tell a story, that was a bit strange to me because it's kind of like, what's going on? In this world where people are distrustful, people immediately think, strangers are dangerous and deadly. We have one guy holding another guy captive and saying, tell me your story. And that just makes you wonder what's going on because then the book becomes a bit rambly. And it goes on and on and on with this story. And just, all those things don't connect to make a real dystopian story. So in my view, this book is a big letdown because we have sci-fi dystopian with little world building and just repeating things going on in the way it's structured. So for me, a letdown by this author. The Eyes Are the Best Part, written by Monica Kim. It's a horror. And I imagined this book was going to be wonderful. It felt like it would be, but it's not. Essentially, this book feels like it was written for English class, and the person who wrote this book, the author, was encouraged to just make this book with many metaphors, make it in a way that the horror is almost kind of like a social commentary horror, and all these different elements playing in the story that just don't make it a horror that's hard-hitting, a horror that feels like a horror, and a horror that makes sense. So for me, this book feels like another story, and the author throws in a couple of scenes here and there to gross out the reader and make the reader feel uncomfortable and say, well, that's horror. I don't get it. I don't get what the author was doing with this book because I don't feel like this fits into a category of horror at all. A Song to Drown Rivers, written by Anne Liang. It's fantasy, and I think there's more romantasy as well, that subgenre. This book is based on the ancient Chinese legend of Xixi, and Xixi is meant to be, I think, one of the four beauties of ancient China. And the whole tale of Xixi, I think, has her going undercover, kind of being a spy in a different kingdom, and using subterfuge and manipulation and all these kind of things to trick the leader of the other nation or other city or state, whatever, into doing things to make that area weaker, to let her own kingdom, her own people invade and take over. That's the whole concept of that legend. And I think this story is meant to kind of emulate that or be influenced by that or retell that. And in a way, it does in a very loose way, I think. But it forgets about all the things that would make that legend really interesting. Like the manipulation, the subterfuge, the careful plotting and planning. I mean, the high tension, all those things. How hard it would be to do that for somebody, to go in and do that. Because in this book, the character in this book, before she goes and plays that role of the spy, she's an ordinary person, a teenager. And she's meant to be trained in 9 weeks, I think it was, to be a super spy. I mean, how strange is that? Then go to this kingdom where the ruler of this kingdom is meant to be super dangerous, super clever. And this ruler doesn't understand that this character is just so easily influencing him to make choices against the better interest of his own kingdom. All that kind of thing in this book was just not well done, I don't think. Wasn't well thought out, well plotted. Just doesn't make sense in the story. It's so easy in the book for the character to do things, our main character. So for me, it let down in all those aspects. But I don't want to be super negative about this book because structurally, this book is fine. And there's moments at the end of this book I think were quite gripping, quite compelling, and quite surprising. And the writing style in this book suits the genre, even though it's very metaphor heavy, and I'm not a reader who just wants a book that has metaphors all over the place. This book is very metaphor heavy. I mean, in one paragraph, we have a single paragraph, and I think there was about 6 different descriptions of this guy in this paragraph to tell the reader how handsome he was. So we're told 6 different times in different ways in one paragraph, this guy was handsome. I mean, do you need writing like that? I don't know. But overall, the structure is fine. The story is, flows okay, despite all those metaphors. It flows okay. The characters are interesting and engaging, despite some characters being a bit weak in the way they act in the story sometimes. It wasn't too bad. So I think this book accomplishes what it sets out to be for the subgenre of romantasy. Price Guide to the Occult, written by Leslie Walton. It's YA horror, and this book had a great concept and great elements in this story as well. We have an isolated setting. We have, atmosphere in the book, gloomy atmosphere. And that was quite heavy in the story, especially towards the start of the book. We have this idea of this evil mother who vanished, but she's still out there in the world and she may come back at any moment. And that was all great elements in this story. And early on, those elements just made this book so gripping and engaging. It was amazing early on, and I thought this book was just stunning very early on in the read. And then this book just starts to change. It kind of just fizzles down to almost nothing in some ways. Those great things early on in the book, they become too few and far between later on in the story. And then we have the evil returning, and it's like this evil is almost nothing in the story. Appears, maybe does something here and there, but then things are too easy in the book later on. So for me, it's a book of contrasts with a great start, a great premise, great elements, and then things just change. And I don't get that. I don't get what was going through the author's mind. The author, was it hard for the author to drag all those things right through the story, to keep things going, keep things consistent? Was it that difficult? Did somebody say have light and shade? Have low moments, high moments. Don't have it all running at high octane, high energy. That's okay, I guess, in books to have some downtime and ramp it up. That works sometimes. But this book, especially a YA book, I think, YA horror, it needed to have more moments that were high energy, high impact to drag readers in. It did because characters can't do it alone, not in this book, because many characters weren't well written. Some characters are. The protagonist is the strongest character, thankfully, but there are many things in this book that aren't well done. But there are many things that are, and because of that fantastic start, that was amazing, I think this author knows how to write and write well. And if this book had a sequel, because it kind of seems like this book was set up towards the end to have a sequel. If this book had a sequel, I'd definitely read it, because I just think that beginning and that section at the start just shows this author knows how to write. And I would hope that a sequel would follow from that, would forget all the things later on in the story that weren't done so well, and just write a story in the style from the start of this book. The Burrow, written by Melanie Sheen, an Australian book, an Australian author, a very shortish book, almost novella, and this book is about grief. It's about the acceptance of grief, about the moving on from grief, not forgetting, but moving on, because life moves on. But in this book, the grief is almost played down a bit as well, because the characters are at a point of their life where they've had this grief for some time, and now they're just learning to kind of accept it and move forward. It's a very quiet grief in this story. It's almost like they had all the big moments outside the book. And this book, it's played down, it's very gentle in a way, and they're moving on because they start to realize they have to. And it is interesting to have that in this book, because also in this story, the prose is very sparse. And that also just, kind of limits the grief, limits the emotion in the story as well. Because that sparse writing is like the characters in this book, they have less reaction, maybe less engagement with their surroundings. And it's almost like they're starting to learn how to engage and react again with their surroundings and each other. That's what I sense in this story. And I sense that by their reactions, what they do in the book, but also that sparse writing style. That sparse writing style, I think, can be a bit confronting, because it makes their lack of reaction, their lack of emotion, more impactful in the story as well. Because everything just feels more constricted and cut off, and kind of cut off at different parts of the story, and everything just feels a bit less in the book. Doesn't mean the message is less, it just feels like everything is a bit downplayed in the story. Highway 13, written by Fiona McFarlane, a short story collection. This short story collection is a collection of stories that have a link. That common link is based on a serial killer. And if you're familiar with Australia stories and Australian crime, I think you'll get the hint. It's based on a real criminal in Australia who did kill people. So for me, I saw that link straight away. I do think this collection of stories, some are good, some not so good. I think some are too experimental. I think this is a book, a collection of stories that are written for academics. That's my point of view. Some of these stories in this collection are just too experimental for most readers. A general audience is not going to enjoy this collection. They may enjoy one story or two stories, maybe a few, but overall, I think this collection is very restrictive, will have a very limited audience. I think the author is just trying too hard to be intellectual, to be over clever, and just write this for academics or for people studying English in higher education. So for me, that's the main drawback of this collection. Despite it having this clever link of this serial killer running in different moments in these stories, too restrictive for a big audience. I enjoyed some of the stories in this collection. My favourites are Demolition. It's also about memory and place. Podcast. It's also about the commodification of crime. The Wake. It's also about the toll on those left behind. So the stories I enjoyed the most are stories in this collection that have that link to the overarching link in the collection, but also carry something else with it. And that something else, I think, in the three stories I like the most, and the biggest things in those stories. And I think that's the shining light in this collection, is that the overarching theme of this serial killer isn't the biggest draw card in these stories, not all of them anyway. We Sold Our Souls, written by Grady Hendrix. It's a horror. It's a rock and roll horror story. I enjoyed this, and the main reason I enjoyed it, despite it having some great characters, having a great concept, a great mystery, and a great structure, the humour in this book isn't really there at all. This author can add too much humour into his stories, and that humour can be quite juvenile. But this book is more about the characters, the structure, and the mystery. and I like it a lot. Some great moments in this story. Our protagonist is like a reluctant hero, and I like reluctant heroes in books. Any genre, I like that concept. Other characters in this book, they flit in and out, they feel so real. We have a sense of good versus evil in this story as well, that was done very well. There are so many things in this book that are almost perfect. It moves quickly. It's got great characters, a great story, a great mystery. It's engaging, it's intriguing. You're wondering what's going to happen next. Surprises, twists and turns, all that plays out so well in this book. A great horror story, a great engaging horror story. A bit of playfulness going on in the story as well, because you have that rock and roll element going through it. That made it a bit playful and a bit fun. So it's not kind of dense and dark horror, but there are great horror moments in this book that are quite graphic, quite violent and quite gory, and all that combines into an interesting story because we have different elements that make it uneven in a way, but not uneven in the way that it makes it a bad story, because we have horror here, a graphic scene here, and then the next few scenes are a bit more playful, a bit more nice and gentle, and suddenly bang, horror, all that sort of thing. So it's a horror book that understands that those horror moments need to be impactful, need to hit hard, and they do. The last book is Voyage of the Damned, written by Frances White. It's fantasy, and this book is a load of fun. I had so much fun reading this book. It comes down to a few things. The narrative voice in this book is brilliant. It's a bit sarcastic, it's a bit cynical, it's very humorous, and I wondered about humour and fantasy, but this book blends those things very well. Then the environment. So this book is set on a ship. So isolation, confined setting. It's a mystery, a murder mystery. So it's like a closed circle murder mystery. We have a set number of characters that can't increase. It's a ship on the ocean. So all that plays out quite well in this book, and the elements I enjoyed. But with the mystery, there's one thing that doesn't make sense. So we have a murder mystery. We have someone on the ship who's a murderer. We don't know if it's a character we know about in the story or a character that's hidden, but somebody on the ship is a murderer. And you'd think that the characters being isolated on this ship, confined, you'd think they'd be a bit more worried and just locking themselves somewhere out of harm's way. But many of them don't. They wander around the ship. It's almost like they don't care, and that felt a bit strange. There was one thing that felt off in the story. I did think the writing style was more YA than adult fiction, and I wondered about that. But the things in the book that happen, and different themes and different events and different characters, they're definitely not YA. They're more adult fantasy fiction. So for me, that was strange because the language, the writing style, the way it moves, it felt too YA to be adult fiction. And I do wonder if this author will just lean towards YA fiction later on. I'm not sure. But overall, it's a fun read, despite this not having much world building, despite it being very light in an element, despite it being more about characters and the mystery. It's very fun, very engaging. The characters are well written, the characters are fun, some quirky. Are the characters over quirky? I'm not so sure. Maybe in some ways, yes, but they're super engaging, super compelling, and this book, when you read this book, I do recommend it, go and read it. When you read this book, you'll find it super fun, super engaging, and just really gripping, I think, from the first page. And most of that comes down to the narrative voice. There you have all the books I read in August. Have you read any of these books? If so, let me know in the comments. If you want to read any of these books, please do, then let me know what you thought. I do like to know what other people think of books, because we can't always think the same thing. We look at things differently, we bring different things to each story, so I do like to understand different viewpoints on the books I read as well. So do let me know in the comments on any books you've read or plan to read. On my channel, I review books from all different genres. Check out my channel and subscribe. On the screen now is a link on the video for a book I'm sure you'll enjoy.